Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 547 of Constructive Criticism. I'm back, I'm your host Easy, and I'm joined by a person who missed me, Abe Stein.
I did miss you. How'd you know?
I just knew. And a person who also missed me, Mason Clark.
Let's not assume things of one another. I think it leads to awkward situations.
You know, it could.
You know what they say about assuming?
No, I don't.
Well, I think that there were some assumptions going into this Pro Tour about what the best deck was, and by how much. And I think some people got proven wrong, and I'm excited to kind of talk about it this week on the show, as we will be doing our reactions to Pro Tour AETHERDRIFT and kind of talking about the standard format overall. Shout out to Matt Nass for winning his first Pro Tour, playing Domain. But let's kind of get into it. Mason, what happened? Like, what did people bring to this event?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the Pro Tour metagame breakdown, Grull Mice was the most played deck at just under 19% at 18.9. Esper Pixie was second place there at 16.6. Domain Overlords in third at 15.2. And then we have a couple decks here all at 6 or below, with just Oculus Mono Red, Dimir Bounce, Dimir Midrange, Azorius Oculus Golgari Midrange, and the Selesnya Cage deck. Of note, there's also the Bant Cage deck, which is basically the same deck, Splashing Mockingbird. So if you want to count that, it's a little higher. But all those decks are about 3-ish% I just mentioned. And then other was about 25%. So that was the representation of the decks in the tournament. And then we saw an overwhelming performance in the top 8 for the Domain Overlord deck.
Yeah, very much to the surprise of a lot of people in chat, and even people in our Patreon Discord, like, no Pixie to be seen in the top 8, even though there were actually multiple versions of Pixie decks, including I think it was just one player playing Orzhov Pixie at the Pro Tour.
Yeah, Ben Stark.
Was that Ben?
Yep.
I didn't know that was who played it. What did you guys think of, like, I don't know, what happened, how things kind of broke? Abe, I want to give you a second to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this Pro Tour, like, it was pretty exciting to see Domain come out ahead. I think that there was a bit of fear. I know that I kind of felt this way about the way the format could have gone. I think a lot of players who I talked to who were preparing for the event kind of felt this way too. But coming in, there was this sense that, obviously there were a lot of powerful things entering standard, and also a lot of existing powerful decks. And so how do you find room to like create metagame share with things coming out, and do the lands change things? But at the end of the day, was it going to be Gruul and Pixie kind of just continuing to dominate everything else? And the answer was no. Domain kind of found some plans that worked well enough against Gruul and against Mono Red, while also being able to have a good match against Pixie. And so they, like, the Zur Overlord stuff really came out on top in the format. And watching the top 8, it seemed like there were some of those games which just, especially the pre-board games for some of the Domain players against Gruul, I feel like Yuchen Liu kind of got the short end of variance in some of his matches. I think that the Gruul deck typically does win that a lot more than it looked like in those matches on Sunday. But seeing that a lot of people came to the conclusion that these decks are pretty hard to exploit and are very strong, but people did also come in with an idea that they knew how they were going to try to beat them, and were able to put together plans that worked. I mean, that was pretty that was pretty exciting. So that's kind of my top end thoughts of how the event broke down. I think there's some stuff in the data that we'll get to later that
we can get to some of the stuff in the data now, because you said something that I wanted to, I don't know if challenge is the right word, but I wonder, like, obviously how it played out in the top 8, you would not have assumed would have happened with the red aggressive decks actually losing to Domain. Especially when you look at the data, Domain at this event had a 40% win percentage against Gruul Mice and a 33% win percentage against Mono Red. So how did we get to the point? I mean, I know how we did because I watched the matches, but how did we get to the point where that's not how it played out to finish the event?
Yeah, I mean, I think that pretty simply put, it was the case that the Gruul decks were kind of preyed on by the Pixie decks at large. Like, that was why people would play Pixie, is because Gruul and Mono Red are like the best core of threats in Standard, and are like the best proactive thing to do at level 0. So playing these, bounce decks is the best way to prey on those. So then everyone else kind of had an opportunity to say, okay, how do I kind of get some of the same upside of what the Pixie decks are doing, or what's my plan to be good enough against Gruul while also having a game plan against Pixie and against some of these decks that are going to be there to kind of eat up Pixie, decks like Domain on that list. And in the end, I mean, looking at the win rates, Gruul was the most played deck and still came out ahead with came out with a 50, like just about a 51% win rate as the most played deck, with its only really bad matchup among the top decks being the Pixie matchup at 43%, and I guess Mono Red. The sleeker Mono Red decks are advantaged there. But still, Gruul had a very, very strong performance, even though I think it was the level 0 deck for the tournament. I mean, either that or Pixie, you could say the level 0 deck, but while Pixie definitely had the most target on its back and was the deck that was most preyed upon, and the win rates show that, Gruul had a similar level of, I don't know a player who's qualified or who was talking about the Pro Tour or working with anyone who's qualified for the Pro Tour who did not say, like, the first two things you do when you're building a deck are you're playing it against Pixie and you're playing against Gruul. Like, those are the two decks you had to be prepared for. And so with that knowledge in mind, I think it's pretty crazy to say that, Gruul was still a positive win rate deck, whereas Pixie kind of had some more exploitable play patterns that were crushed under its own weight.
Yeah, I think along those same lines, like, it's not like Pixie, I mean, I need to look again to be 100% sure, but it's not like Pixie did terrible. If you remember correctly, there were 2 Pixie variants, to be fair. One was Ben Stark in the top 16. So, we were like a match win or 2 away from that deck performing, which I always think is important to note. But I think the biggest thing is, I think a lot of people who maybe weren't on, and it's hard to know, I can't speak for all these people, right, in individual stuff, but my perception would probably be that maybe if you weren't testing or staying on top of it, the Zur stuff maybe came as a bit of a surprise. And I think the Zur stuff has always been pretty good against Pixie. And while the data shows that, like, it is losing to Gruul, I do think it has some draws that just overwhelm them. And there's a lot of decks that it just overpowers. And so I really liked the Gruul cards. I think they're very strong. I think that was like it and Pixie were kind of the level 0, and then that led to like a lot of people being like, well, Zur can rumble with these things, etc. Let's see how it goes. And then I think, we saw our winner Matt Nass have some really smart innovations on the deck, cleaning up the mana so you can cast spells more consistently. Just, I think a lot of good work put in and a lot of, results shown from that good work.
Also, can I just... And oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, for clarity on the numbers, Esper Pixie came out of the weekend with a 48% win rate, and if you add in the 8-1 that Ben Stark had, I think you come out to like around 49. It's not a positive win rate, but again, it was the deck in everyone's sights, I think, for the weekend, and that's important to reflect on, of like, when a deck is the deck people are trying to beat the most, and it's kind of only losing 1 or 2% above what would make it, the best deck for most rooms. Like, there's clearly a lot of game there that deck's really strong. I think that's just good to know by the numbers.
Yeah, and just I actually played the Matt Nass deck last night to Mythic, and that has to be the easiest deck to sideboard with I've ever played in my entire life. I don't know who helped Matt with that specific list, but that was one of the cleanest decks I've ever played. So just want to shout out Matt and whoever worked on that with him. That was clean. One of the things that happened that I think that we can get into in our Patreon question more in depth than we will here, though, is just Azorius Control having a 66.7% win percentage with, over it looks like over 50 matches played for this deck, and that's the highest of any deck that didn't have just one person on it. Does that surprise either of you?
Not really, no. I mean, a lot of the people who were playing it were the handshake players, and I think, we had a very targeted metagame, and I think when that sort of stuff happens, you can build decks that can lean into that. And, I think the blue-white control deck is also benefiting a little bit from people not really having many things for it. Obviously, like Spell Pierce type cards overlap or whatever, right? And those were popular cards this weekend. But I think, the blue-white control deck looks to be pretty solid or whatever, in my opinion. And, these were really strong players with really good plans who had played these matchups a lot. And, their opponents had not played them a lot. So I think it makes sense to me that this is good. I mean, any deck with that sort of win percentage is obviously an extreme outlier that shows a low sample size. So, take that with whatever you will. But, to me, it makes some amount of sense.
I think that, it's been so long since blue-white tap-out was the blue-white style of control deck, that there are probably players who have never played against blue-white. I mean, what is it, World Wake standard that blue-white tap-out was the last time blue-white tap-out was, one of
I think there are versions of modern blue-white that have existed between then and now that
you would classify as tap-out?
I think during, the Phoenix modern format, there were a lot of decks that were just
I just mean in standard.
Yeah, I'm just saying in general in Magic.
Yeah.
I think blue-white just cast the thing every turn and do stuff every turn is a kind of familiar play pattern. I think Stock Up especially really brought this deck to pretty new heights and levels of playability compared to where I think blue-white control decks were before that. Since losing Memory Deluge, I think playing purely reactive games has been really tough because you don't have the level of card selection you need. But Stock Up really was impressive in a lot of the games that I watched, and has been really impressive since I've been playing with it more in just about every format I've casted in.
Sure.
And I can't imagine that that didn't contribute to its success here.
Yeah, Stock Up's really good. I mean, it's a card that's so good. I'm looking at it, and I'm not playing Charlotte, but playing with it in Breach, for example, and we've seen it go back to Legacy and Vintage as well. The card's just very strong. It's a lot different than just Divination.
Yeah, Matt Kling read it for the first time today. He goes, "Wait, isn't this just strictly better pieces of the puzzle?" And I was like, "Is it strictly better?"
It's strictly different. It's a different card, but yeah, I think it makes a decent amount of sense. And I think to what you're saying, Spencer, about people haven't played against that kind of deck as much. I imagine that happens a little less of the Pro Tour, but people have definitely not played that matchup.
Right.
It just wasn't a deck. And this was just I believe an Ely deck that he got to Arnie, and then it kind of disseminated from there, I believe was the Pro Tour coverage story. So, that's just going to have big impacts on everything.
I'm just saying the last time that I remember just straight up tap out control being good, Day of Judgment was also legal in that format. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, I think that also it's the first time we've seen a standard format in a while where just putting stuff in play is the number one way to do things. I think it's been a while since just casting creatures was a plus.
Yeah, it does feel like it's very strange how much the games revolve around that in comparison to the past couple of years. But yeah, cool.
Is there any major learnings you guys had, whether it was I learned this to improve at Magic, or I learned this about the format that we haven't touched on either?
I think the number one thing that I kind of took away from this BT, and really from the standard format in general and the trajectory it's taken, has been just that, especially as the card pool for standard has been growing larger, that there always feels like there's an opportunity to go back into the sets that are in standard and say, what are the like powerful things I could do and how do I do that? And just make it happen. Like I think about the fact that before, like Temur Otters was a deck that people played, and like before Sanctum All kind of brought that to Worlds, was like, okay, yeah, this is a deck that is actually really good and everything, until they uncovered this town ain't big enough Storm Chaser talent engine. Like no one thought to do that. Then that became a huge part of every blue-based mid-range deck. You know, like it's a package that was fit into several different decks for this tournament, and kind of something that brings the opportunity to merge together like the Blue-Eyed Oculus deck and some of the better red cards, and have a little bit better of a B plan in doing that. And I think that it's just kind of reminded me that there are a lot of powerful things that are happening in standard right now. I mean, the Domain Overlords deck is very similar to the Enigmatic deck in Pioneer in terms of like its strongest game plan of let me do Overlord and Zur stuff, and like Beanstalks and everything between. Just like the format's different, so the gameplay's a little bit different. And same with like the Mice deck. That core of Mice is like the foundation of a lot of the Rakdos Browse deck. Like those are pretty interchangeable, but also there is just opportunity beyond that in the card pool to do more. And I think that this Pro Tour, I mean, even looking through some of the decks that had like 7-3 or 8-2 records that were not some of these top decks, some of the other category also had a lot of really sweet stuff and powerful stuff going on. And I think that as standard continues to be a format of focus for competitive players, like it's never been a better time to brew if you like to brew, or like understand how to brew and like understand what you want to do with the cards, or you know, look for synergies that maybe other people haven't tapped into and try those out, because like there has been just such untapped potential in the cards that are out there.
Yeah, I think that one of the biggest things that I learned is really similar to what you just said, is that this standard format was very attackable. And, you know, Mason famously at this point went off on people that just are like afraid to play the best deck, afraid like that just don't do it, right? And you know, depending on if you believe Gruul or Esper was the best deck in this, like, I know the team Systems Magic were like, they played what they called safe Gruul. Like, just the safe, good deck that they believed was like, this is a safe deck, like, we're just trying to re-queue and, like, maybe hit some good matchups and go from there. And I think that this format was attackable, even though there's a lot of people that believed that between Gruul and Esper Pixie, they were either getting attacked, their life total was just dwindling too fast to play basically anything, and that turned out not to be true. You know, Blue Eye Control did well, Dimir did well. I believe that, didn't Azorius, I have to look up the data, didn't Azorius Omniscient also do pretty well? Or Omniscience, I mean?
Yeah, it had a pretty good win rate. It was not very strongly represented, but it did have like a 55-56% win rate. It did just about as well as Mono Red.
Which Mono Red did really well. You know,
yeah.
had a really positive Gruul matchup, and you know, we obviously had a player in top 8 that was playing the Leyline Gruul deck, and I don't know, like, there were opportunities to be taken at this. And one of my favorite things about the Pro Tour is that when those opportunities are available, these players will take them. What do you guys... I mean, Mason, what do you think is next for Standard? Like, where do we go from here?
Yeah, well, to go back, because I didn't get to say the thing I had maybe learned from coverage.
Oh, yeah, go for it.
Really quickly about that, I would say, like, it was very interesting just to see where everyone comes from and lands on. And I think it was a great reinforcement that it's really hard. It's like really, really, really hard to come up with like a good deck with a good game plan in fields like the Pro Tour. And, you know, lots of people just still end up in situations and spots where it's kind of wild. And I think like a great example of that in my mind is the Javier Dominguez green black deck, where like that deck to me did not look particularly great. You know, I was like, well, Javier's the GOAT or whatever. There's clearly something going on there. I tried playing it and didn't find much success, but it also might just be me, you know, being bad or whatever. But it was just interesting, like how different people can like land in. Like you can land in such different places. I don't know. I just thought that was kind of cool and interesting. I also think we were not in a format where our conversation about playing like the tier 0 deck was real, just for the sake of the conversation for a second ago. Like what I'm talking about is when you have a Hogak situation, or you have a Nadu or a Breach situation, like when it's clear there's something by a mile. And I don't know about y'all, but I didn't feel that way. I mean, I wasn't testing for the Pro Tour. None of us, I don't think, were. Maybe someone was helping a friend test, but it didn't seem that way to me. Like I wanted to play Gruul. I played Pixie at an RCQ because my hair claws are lost in the mail, I swear. And so, you know, like I thought the format was interesting. I just think there's like so many different ways to approach it. It's just very interesting to me because like I always felt like Pixie was pretty good against Gruul, but never was like the end of the world. I felt like I have so much game and it's like such a strong deck. But so much of the room forgoed that, right? And they like took these other things and they didn't feel that way about it. And I guess, I don't know, that all of that was very interesting to me. Because it just feels like Gruul, for example, is a great, like that feels like a Javier deck to me. Like I would love to, I can't wait to hear him talk on his podcast about like how I ended up with this and not Gruul. Because in my mind, it was like Javier is playing Gruul this PT. You know what I mean? Like I drafted him in the fantasy draft partially because it's Javier and partly because I was like, well, Gruul's so good. I mean, he's going to play it. You know, he's going to top 8. And so I don't know. Those are my takeaways.
I love that. And for what it's worth, I also fired up the the Obliterator deck just to live again, you know. And
well, you famously loved it in the set review.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that one because I was working on MH3 at the time, and I was in the gym, and I remember the conversation.
Yeah. And, you know, it 9-1 to Pro Tour, so I was right. Let's go. No, jokes aside, I do think that, like, it goes back to when presented with this thing that matters so much to you, and, you know, the things that the Pro Tour represents to a lot of people, you just get cool stuff. And like Mason said, it's really hard to be right. Sometimes you are not going to be right.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the Golgari deck, just to kind of talk about it a little bit more for people who are unfamiliar, like, if you go and look up this deck, which Christopher Larson had the best finish with it of people who registered it, he had a 9-1 finish. Every card in the deck just about trades, like, I guess, not going to say trades, but plays profitably against Nowhere to Run, except for, like, I say Mossberg Dread Knight half does, Bronco does not. But, like, it's a bunch of X4 creatures and large things that I think are all pretty good cards against Gruul and Red. And then a pile of, like, 1-for-1 removal, Bushwhacks, and Phyrexian Obliterator. So you could tell, at least to me, like, it read like their evaluation of the format was that like, the format was going to be small and a lot more people were going to play Gruul or Red than they did, maybe. And so, like, having cards like Phyrexian Obliterator in your main deck, definitely a boon rather than a liability in a format like that. And then the room kind of broke a different way, right? I think that, like, Domain Overlords doing as well as it did probably put a deck selection like this pretty far behind, talking about just, you know, metagame predictions and how it shapes out. And I think that just speaks to the point that Mason's making. Like, it is really hard. Like, this deck does make sense for a portion of the room that developed, but the rest of the room broke a different way, and suddenly this deck just does not make sense in a world where you're going to play against a lot more domain because it's not going to line up well against domain at all.
Yeah, I assume there was at least 4 times more Ride's End than they expected in this room. Like, that's rough.
Yeah.
I gotta ask you, Mason, though. I think, what do we have? We have 2 more weeks, maybe a little bit more of standard RCQs. What would you play?
Yeah, we should have 3 weeks.
3 weeks.
Is my understanding. So.
Yeah, one of our stores just posted all 3 of theirs in March, which I thought was really smart for them to wait till the end, because nobody waited that long. Anyway, go ahead.
What's your question? You just said...
Oh, I'm sorry. That's so funny. I was going to ask you, what would you play? Like, what would you play in an
I guess I could have inferred that.
Yeah, I thought that it made sense, but maybe it didn't. I don't know.
It didn't to my silly brain, whatever that says. I would play Gruul. I said it a second ago. The guy wanted to play Gruul. My higher claws are in the mail. I'm hopeful I can borrow some for this weekend. I've got 2 RCQs going. I've got Gruul minus higher claw sleeve to my right here. And if worse comes to worse, I own the Pixie cards. But I even though I'm someone who would play decks like the Zur deck a lot, I think it isn't some unbeatable deck, and maybe I'll look like a fool in a couple years when we look back on this episode. But right now, I feel pretty comfortable playing a deck like Gruul. I think it is very, very strong, and I just think it's a great deck. So that's where I'm at on it.
Nice. I think that Gruul is a very solid choice. What about you, Ed?
I agree with Mason. I would also play Gruul. I was really impressed by Gruul's result in the face of being such a known quantity that, like, even in a room where everyone kind of had to respect Gruul at its baseline. I mean, the fact that the deck that preys on Gruul in Pixie became the most targeted thing, and so many of the decks you will play against that are not Pixie are good matchups, I think just speaks to the quality of Gruul in the metagame. And I think as kind of the metagame as exists stratifies into like kind of 3 or 4 tiers of decks, like in terms of levels of, like, Gruul is level 0, a deck like Pixie is level 1 because it will beat Gruul, a deck like Domain is level 2 because it will beat Pixie, but struggle against Gruul. And then there's kind of additional layers above Domain of decks that are good against Domain Overlord decks and have the right tools to kind of beat them, and that's where Blue White comes in. Some of the, like, Saragon decks that Sanctival were playing. I think there's just other ways to do similar things, but I think that when you have an open decklist tournament, a lot of that favors those reactive decks a little bit more, especially when they're tuned to this kind of levels of metagame. And I think that in RCQ, like, I would rather just play the thing that has the strongest game in the dark and is the hardest to be like 1,000% prepared for. And I think that Gruul just has so much impressive resilience as an aggro deck that it's hard for me to pull away from it.
Yeah, I love what both of you said about this. I think that the Gruul is, like, obviously the deck that I've worked on a lot on and off for, just my enjoyment of it. If anybody knows me, they know why. But I don't know if that's what I would play, like, tomorrow. I think that tomorrow I might like fire off this Jeskai Oculus deck. I was pretty impressed by its play patterns. Like, obviously it has some weaknesses and things like that, but it honestly feels like one of the best Spell Pierce decks in this format, that Spell Pierce is starting to, like, look better and better. I know that, like, if I was to play Pixie, I do play Pixie a lot, and I have 2 Spell Pierce main right now, and Jeskai Oculus actually looked like it both had room to grow, like you could innovate on that, and then also the mana was good enough to support 3 colors. I was really, really impressed by that deck. And I think that is in its infancy, which excites me. So, I have a couple more things that I want to talk about just really quick. I don't know if you guys noticed this. What are your guys' opinion on like the 1 mana red removal between like Burst Lightning and Torch the Tower?
I mean, I think it depends on what you expect the room to be. I think if you're expecting to play a lot more mirror matches, then I lean towards Torch the Tower, or like if you're expecting more mono red as Gruul, I lean toward Torch the Tower, because I think you need your removal spells to be reactive, and to gain you those life points in that matchup. But I think that in like a more open metagame that's kind of straying from being really about the mice stuff, like Burst Lightning is really good.
That's interesting, because Mono Red actually had a positive win percentage against Gruul, and it doesn't play Torch the Tower.
Right. My statement there is that I think that if you're Gruul or Red and you're worried about the mirrors, I think that you have to play Torch because it gives you an edge.
But the Gruul decks are playing. Are you not counting that as pseudo mirror? I guess that's my question here.
What I'm saying is, if you're expecting the leaner red decks to be in the room and you're concerned about that matchup and wanting to shore that up, then I think Torch Tower is better if you think that the metagame is going to be smaller than you, and Burst Lightning is better if you think the metagame is going to be bigger than you.
Okay.
Because I think that it's pretty, to me, in my mind, it's pretty like correlated to, do I care about, like, am I casting this targeting a threat, or am I casting this targeting my opponent? And if you're like playing against bigger decks, you're more likely to use it to burn out your opponent because you need the reach. And if you're playing smaller decks, you're less likely to want reach, and you're more likely to just want to make sure you have time because you're a bigger deck.
Yeah, my thoughts on it are a little more memey, but there's a lot of, I believe, honest truth to it, which is, you know, that meme of like guy who's silly, intermediate, and then master? And it's always guy who's silly and master are the same. In my mind, it's Burst Lightning kills my opponent. And then Torch the Tower is the middle one where it's like, oh, it removals things, and that really matters sometimes. But I really feel like I don't even think I really saw many people playing any torches before Burst Lightning. So in my mind, this question is sort of like, it's like, yeah, obviously you're playing Burst Lightning before Torch. Like,
oh no, the Gruul Mice players were playing like 4 torches or 3 torches before Burst Lightnings. In a lot of
main decks?
Yes. And yeah, if you
like Yu Chen Liu played 1 Burst Lightning for Torch Tower. The top
Interesting.
4.
But that's funny because Mason watched him play and watched him kill his opponent with a Burst Lightning. So to him, like, obviously,
I mean, maybe it's. Yeah, maybe I just, I like skimmed through some of the Gruul decks, whatever, the Pro Tour, and, I guess I just didn't clock that a bunch of people had. I see this one does have Torch, but I just saw like a bunch of bursts before.
No, I agree with you, Mason. I think that like in a format where people like, I think that when I look at Gruul right now, specifically, it's like, okay, yeah, I'm going to play against other Gruul decks, I'm going to play against other mono red decks, but like, Torch the Tower is so bad in the matchups where it's bad that I cannot play that many.
Alan Wu played Burst Lightning, so I think that's definitive then.
Oh, yeah. There we go. There we go.
You're pro, so you're pro. But yeah, it is just, that seems so inbred to me to like play torches before bursts. Like, I get that Gruul is secretly a mid-range. Like, it's like an Abzan aggro deck if you were around 10 years ago, now a dated term to use. But like, it's so weird to me to like go that direction. But whatever.
Well, I'm glad you feel that way, because I feel very alone and isolated, in my opinion. It's good to know someone else feels that way.
I just like to kill people. I don't know.
Me too. Dude.
And that's that's kind of what I was saying too, is like, I think it depends on what you thought the room was going to be like. I think a lot of people who registered Gruul at the Pro Tour registered it because they thought most people would register it, and it was going to be most important to get that edge there.
And in some ways they were right. Like, it was the most registered deck.
Yeah, but I think that the rest of the room and the rest of the metagame around them, right, like, more often it was better to be able to kick a Burst Lightning in a pinch because you'd gotten... Right, I think there were way more Day of Judgments in the room than maybe if you asked, players a week before the Pro Tour, what's your stock on Day of Judgment? I think people would be pretty low compared to how many copies there were and how well Day of Judgment decks did.
Yeah, I was watching the Pro Tour in the Discord with Adrian, and he's like, I'm not going to be wrong. I was wrong about this and this, and we brought up Day of Judgment, and he's like, I just never thought somebody would play a Day of Judgment over a Sunspall, and I was like, yeah, it's almost like it's a full mana cheaper. Like, that would matter somehow. So.
That's true. On God, it is 1 mana cheaper.
It is straight up. My other thing is, like, I just want to talk about blue-black really quick, because we didn't even talk about it. And this is just like a PSA. Just stop. Just stop. You want to know why I got Mythic yesterday? It's because I beat 4 blue-black decks to, very easily. Very easily. It didn't matter if I was playing Pixie. It didn't matter if I was playing... It didn't matter what I was playing. Just, put it down. It was fun. It was a good time. But, oof. What a result. What a result. Mason, before the show, you called it Mad Cope?
Yeah, I was more just talking about, you're lacking a lot. I'm specifically talking about our Patreon Discord that seems to have a lot of people who like the deck. I have not heard anyone talk about the deck that, seriously plays. And to be fair, I haven't listened to many podcasts in the last week or two, so maybe it is, a popular deck. But, I just haven't heard people even really talk about this, and was, kind of surprised to see it at the Pro Tour. I mean, the one guy on Team Main Phase, I believe, got 10th or 11th at the PT and played it. Congratulations. And I believe he was the original person that played it and did well at the Spotlight in Atlanta. So someone like that playing it when you have a lot of success with it and really intimate knowledge makes sense to me. But I don't know. I'm sure that deck is good in certain spots. It just doesn't seem to be good right now. And it's okay. Things will change and they will come and go. And I just think in general that most people engage with Magic so differently than we do. So, if you're trying to win a tournament, I wouldn't play it. But if you're just trying to play Arena Ladder, then, sure, whatever. I'm sure you can hit Mythic.
Yeah, I think that specifically in the case of Dimir, it's just so much worse when people are actually playing decks that go over the top of you. I think there's a period of time where no one was doing anything that went over the top, and even Domain was just not in a playable position, but that's clearly changed. And so the Dimir deck just does not have that's the benefit of playing Pixie, right? Is you have draws that are still really aggressive and can get under people, and you're generating a lot more value. And Dimir is just not going to be able to contain that, I don't think, very effectively, and play aggressively enough against the big decks, right? That's kind of a pipe dream, and I think that most players who may have been inclined towards playing it either wound up playing something different because it had a better position, or there were a few players who had some success, and I know on Moto there was
it won
there
the challenge the next
some
day.
wins. Yeah, there have been some wins with Deep Cavern Bat, Dimir, and I think that's kind of just the metagame turning over on itself in the way that one of the best ways to beat a deck like Domain is to just take its most potent answers out of its hand and clock them again. So it just was not good for this tournament, and I think that the more that decks like Domain are good, unless you're going to do what a lot of people who have been winning on Magic Online have been doing, of changing their deck to be positioned well against what they know they're going to play against with things like that. It's just it's not able to do what Esper's able to do in terms of having the low end of its draw and applying pressure, and that I think is a really, really big deck building cost right now.
That is going to do it for main topic. Next up is our Patreon. Patreon.com/CCMG. If you want to become a patron of the show, head on over there. You can become a patron like Tangle Clappin'. That's just a great name, by the way. Like, I won't say their real name. They said it in the Discord, but like Tangle Clappin is that's a good username. And then we have Brendan. Brendan, thank you. Tangle Clappin, thank you. They both became patrons of $5 more. When you could do that, you had access to the Patreon Discord. And when we get these type of things, like it really does mean a lot. It makes the show go, and it helps out the show a ton. If you do become a $5 patron like them, you get access to the Patreon question of the week. Abe, what is our question this week?
This week's question comes from patron Adrian. And Adrian asks, do you think Blue-White Control is a good deck for RCQ grinding? Normally, Control is a bit worse in an open field, but I think this deck has a positive matchup spread against most things played. Would love y'all's thoughts. I'm just going to go ahead and answer my thoughts first, and then you guys can jump in as you feel appropriate. I am going to cite Reasonable Deck Gamer here and say that, do I think the Blue-White Control deck is a good deck for RCQ grinding? I think that if you are interested in playing and trying to win an RCQ with the Blue-White Control deck, then yes, I think the deck is definitely good enough to be worth playing, and definitely good enough to win an RCQ. And so, like, even if you're losing some amount of equity of not knowing what your opponent's playing, and not knowing the specifics, like, that still should not hinder you so much that you can't win an RCQ. And I think that sticking to a good deck, I think that any of the decks that really I'd consider kind of breakouts for the Pro Tour, or from the Pro Tour, are all good ones that if you stick with them and just play them a lot, you should be able to qualify for the RC and win an RCQ, if you put your mind to it, because there were not many bad decks in the room at the Pro Tour. I don't know how you guys feel about it, but that's kind of my thought. I don't have any real specific thoughts of whether it's like so much worse or than anything else, because of like open deck list versus closed deck list is probably a little bit worse in my mind, because I think the Pro Tour field was just uniquely good for blue-white in a way that not every field would be. But I think it's still good enough. How about you guys?
I am going to answer this to Adrian specifically. You in the Discord have talked about how you feel like you struggle with playing quick enough to finish matches. And there are two ways that you could approach playing this deck. Because one, I do think this deck is probably pretty good. Like, even in a closed deck list format, like, it has all the tools that you kind of want, and it is also kind of like a tap out control deck, which means that you get to make your decisions mostly on your turn to whether you're going to interact at instant speed or whether you're going to do something. But I would challenge you to, like, if you're going to play this deck, which I do think it's a good deck, say, okay, I need to get good with this deck. Like, I need to know my decisions with this deck. Because if you end up in the spot where you've said you are, where you kind of get either lost in your game plan, or you don't know the right play, or, the things that you've talked about, it's not going to go as well for you. Because you'll end up getting draws. And, like, you've already said that you suffer with that, and I would just say, yes, you can win an RCQ with this. I believe in you. But I would say you should challenge yourself to not to do that. To make decisions quicker. To understand things faster. So. Mason?
Yeah, I think, like, looking at it, big picture wise, and let's say, like, you're a listener, and this question maybe piques your interest, maybe like blue-white control. I would really go to the core premise of this and question that more than anything. And the core premise of the question is, normally control's a bit worse in the open field, but I think this deck has a positive matchup spread. And I think, when specifically also talking about RCQ grinding, which is an important part that I missed out, I think playing a good, reasonable deck well matters way more than having the best deck in the room. And having the best position deck. And so if you think the deck has a good matchup spread and the data seems to be supporting that kind of like it has been and all that sort of stuff, then your deck can win regardless if it's control, combo, mid-range, aggro. That part doesn't really matter. And I would go as far as to say that I think you could argue that control sometimes does have a big advantage in RCQ fields, depending on your RCQ, right? Like if you're the strongest player in the room by a lot, and let's say the people in your area struggle to play information games, right? Where there's like a lot of hidden information games, then that's a really big advantage of playing a traditional control deck. We were talking about this one being a tap out, but I'm trying to get a point across. And so, I would just say focus on playing decks that you think are good, regardless of the archetype.
I love it. If you want to ask a Patreon question, head on over to patreon.com/ccmtg. Let's shout out our sponsors real quick. We have untapped.gg. They were really helpful for me this week. I just understanding like what cards my opponents have been playing and things like that. They are a deck tracker that is free to download. Everybody who uses the code, the link in our description, we get a kickback, and it's very appreciated. Also, they have a premium version if you upgrade that makes it really helpful to like get into the draft format, things like that if you're a limited player, as well as advanced data on their website. And then I just want to give a shout out to the number of people who have already used our code at Mana Traders. This month's code is CCMTG. There's also an affiliate link in the description, but even today we had multiple people use it, and it's really cool to see. Like I really loved what Mason said last week about it, but I personally I am a legacy user of this service. I get legacy pricing. It's always funny to me when people ask me about it. They're like, "You pay that much?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's worth it." Like, I switch decks so much when I decide to start testing on MTGO, and they actually tell you how many ticks worth of cards that you've used, and they don't include duplicates. So like you can see like, oh, I spent $15,000 in testing decks, with that, not including going back and forth. And I think the service is great. I also think that their service is one of the better ones. And I just want to give a tip. If you have signed up and you're listening, you're like, man, returning decks is so hard, like you have to wait. You actually don't. If you actually just look for the return bots, you just type in return in the trades, you will find the Mana Trader return bots, and they'll even like have a thing on it, and you can actually return cards without even opening Mana Traders again. It's really cool. So, and then you can go to the swag store. I believe that there's some swag for Abe in my mailbox right now. I think so. I haven't checked, but I think it's there.
Spencer, you should have mailed it to Abe. It's for him.
Dude,
his mailbox.
Straight up, we tried for like a little bit. Abe lives in apparently a place that doesn't exist.
That makes it hard to find you.
Yeah. Rent's fine though.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm like, hey, there's Abe's address. They're like, that's not a place. I'm like, no. I think Abe lives there. I'm like, Abe, are you sure this is your address? He's like, yeah. I was like, okay, well, it doesn't say. He's like, just send it to you and then mail it to me. I was like, okay. Let's go. But yeah, we appreciate everybody. We can see that you guys are buying stuff, and it means a lot. But the point of the show is always improving. Every week on the show, we're trying to get better. We're trying to be better tomorrow than we were today. And it's a constant process. Mason, what was your always improving moment this week?
Yeah, so I have been playing a lot of League of Legends solo queue in my free time. And I've even invested in getting coaching in it now. And one of the things that my coach kind of told me about that I've told people in Magic was sort of playing with high intensity. So that means sort of focusing in, only playing, the game and not having like music on. You're not in a Discord call with your friends. You're very much quote unquote locked in. and playing also in that regard a very small amount per day. So 2 to 3 games max was sort of his suggestion and the way they teach it. And it was just really helpful as like a reminder of how good I think that is to do in Magic as well, especially VOD reviewing, which is a big thing that they push. And I'm also a huge believer in when it comes to Magic of just like, and once you're done, if you kind of want to play more, just review your VODs right away. Review your VODs from the last day, once you're a little bit removed from it and not so, tied to what you thought you were doing there. And it was really helpful for me just to kind of relearn that and reiterate that and just immediately seeing, success. Obviously, it's been a small number of days since I've started doing it, but, over like the last 3 days in my games, I've lost like 1. And I'm really tired and I'm really drained when I get done playing, which might sound silly, but it's a lot more satisfying and it really scratches that itch for me. So my always improving moment was sort of a 2-parter of like loving high intensity gaming and sort of like really trying your best at something. And also, relearning that that's a great way to do something. And it really does go a long way. And if you're someone who plays Magic and you're trying to test for an event and like seriously test, and you're not feeling really tired by the end of your like testing, you might, there might be some mistake in the process or whatever. Because I remember back when I first started playing Magic as well. I'm speaking specifically about people really starting to like take their first steps in, but I remember being like really drained at the end of playing a bunch of competitive Magic and really trying and really, focusing in. And so I don't know, it was great for me. It was really exciting.
I said this in the Discord, but like, this is one of my favorite always improving moments ever. Because for me, like, when I play a game, I have to decide if I want to approach it the way, like you said, that I approached Magic when I wanted to get better. Right? Like, I did I think it's actually a playlist on the YouTube series about, like, how to improve in Magic the Gathering. It's like I don't even know how many episodes are on there. On our YouTube channel, but the first episode I made is like, you have to make the decision to do it. And you might be like, well, I want to do it, so isn't that the decision? It's like, no, it's not. Like, the decision, it requires execution. Like, it requires you saying, I'm going to do it, and now I'm going to execute on it. And I'm going to focus on the right things. I'm going to, whether it's taking notes, whether it's being an active participant, like, there are things that you have to do that you could cop out on, but like actual improvement comes from what Mason just said.
Yeah, when you shared this in the Discord earlier in the week, it reminded me of when we started playing Valorant together, Mason, a few years ago.
Oh yeah.
And like, I think a lot about the gains that are made from when you really are taking everything seriously. I think the games like League and like Valorant are better structured for like kind of a scale of intensity for when you play, whereas Magic, I think, there's a lot of play experiences you can have where you're kind of coming in with a knowledge, and the gameplay can be really different if you're trying to have like a casual experience or a competitive experience. But your intensity as a player can kind of be wherever it lies in each of those play experiences. It can be the same way. I think that League and Valorant are a bit different in that it's kind of the same game every time you play it, no matter what. You're starting with most all of the same pieces outside of certain game modes. But the intensity that you bring and your desire to win and your desire to make the optimal plays, like, is something you really have to drive. And I think that choosing to do that and choosing to actively engage your brain when you practice something is one of the hardest things to do, but is also one of the most rewarding. And it was honestly, like, it was really late at night when I read it. I was about to go to bed and I was catching up on Discord, and I almost like texted you like 11:30 at night to be like, that's awesome, dude. Like, I love that, and I want to like keep that with me, because I think it's easy to feel complacent or easy to like fall into the patterns of what you're used to doing and how you're used to engaging. But really pushing yourself to take a step up is, and like above and beyond that, with a reminder of why it is you're doing it. It makes a big difference. And it's the difference between like, oh, I played like, 3 leagues this week, and maybe the results were good, maybe the results were bad, but I just kind of like went through the motions and played, versus I played 3 matches in the last 3 days, but I really thought through all of them. I tried my hardest in all of them, and I engaged myself in all of them. And here's what I learned, and here's what I experienced, and here's what I maybe learned about myself. And it makes such a difference.
Yeah, if I'm glad this was something that was great for y'all. When I posted that one, it was definitely a moment of like, maybe this is a little self-serving, but hopefully this connects with somebody. But something that's like kind of a theory I percolated in the back of my head that never really jumped out to me before, was something that I think a lot of people can relate to, which is like, why does playing Arena or why does playing Magic Online not feel as fun as playing paper, right? Because it's not like I am not playing these games for casual. I'm playing them to compete, right? And I want that competition. And Magic Online, in a lot of ways, has a lot of great tournaments that I could be playing all the time, but I don't, because I don't enjoy them as much, like playing on the thing. And I don't even have issues like playing on Moto when it comes to like client side stuff. I don't have things with that. And it just really got me thinking. And I thought this a lot in the past. And this always improving moment has, I think, solidified maybe what my answer is. So we're just like, I'm not approaching it the same way I would a big tournament. Like, I think if I played Magic and I were to play these like arena ladder games with high intensity and wanting to make sure I get nothing wrong, like I'm playing the Pro Tour, like winning in, and I'm trying just to play the best Magic I can, I think I would enjoy it more. And, small sample size, whatever, but I played a little Gruul last night, and I was really just like by myself, nothing on, just thinking about everything from even like, okay, am I supposed to play this Rock Face Village this turn? Am I supposed to hide that? Like, what am I supposed to be doing? And I found myself having, more fun than I've had in a very long time. And so that might not be true for everyone. This might just be all BS cope or whatever. But I do think there's something to be said about like like a lot of people, at least like myself, like that sort of thing. And we only get that in person. But I wonder how much that's like a mental block on our own part. And if we treated these things that way, maybe we would get more out of them. I don't know. That's just something I've been thinking about.
I don't know, man. I said it in the Discord when you posted this, but like, I love it, and like, I love you for bringing it to the podcast, because I think that like, we often talk about like playing with intent or playing with purpose, and you were highlighting like the importance of that, and it's very important. So, for me, I had a friend who was asking about Arena, because I play a lot of Arena, about the best way to play Arena. And they really challenged me about my belief that events are better, both, quote, better testing and better for Arena than ladder. And I was like, okay, like if we're going to do this, I'm just going to go get Mythic and like see what the difference is. So I got Mythic this month, which I never do. And I learned a lot. There are a couple things that I learned that I think are really interesting. The first one is that there are 2 specific areas of ladder where you are going to play against nonsense, and that's really weird. Those 2 areas are Silver, late or mid of the season, if you are starting late, and low Diamond. You just, like, because you can't lose rank in Arena, you end up playing against a lot of people trying stuff in that area. On Diamond. And then the other thing that I learned is like, yes, the testing is probably slightly better on ladder. Like, not a lot, but like it is a little bit better. I played against like Mono Blue, I played against Merfolk, like, I played against some stuff. But the one of the things that I noticed was my opponent looking at my cards, for example, which you can see on Arena. Like, you can see what they're highlighting when they're highlighting it. That never happens in events, and it happened quite a bit. In the last like 4 matches for Mythic. My always improving moment is like something that I know about myself. Like I speak in hyperbole a lot, and it's something that like it's actually my goal this year to do it less. But I want to make a statement that I don't believe is hyperbole. I think that if you are trying to build an arena collection and test at the same time, events are just better. Like you still get play-in points to like go prove yourself and like play in the competitive events. You play against the same number, if slightly less than like the arena grind to like real decks. But what else you do is you play against kind of a wider variety of decks. I don't know how much ladder you guys play, but somebody will post a deck list of a creator they trust, and then all of a sudden you play against that deck 5 times in like 4 matches. It's actually crazy. It's over the number that you could do it. That was a joke. But what I learned is like just focus on the process, and kind of like what Mason said, like focus on like, okay, what's my way to win this game? What's my way to do this? And I'm someone that struggled with like ladder anxiety a lot, and I did not suffer from it. I don't know if that's from like Smash when I thought I cured it or whatever, but getting Mythic when I decided to get Mythic was kind of fun. I feel like I lost a lot of booster packs, but it's whatever.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
You mentioned the looking thing, and I'm curious to you, do you think that is a sign of better opponents or worse opponents?
Well, I think better.
I think better too. Okay, I wasn't sure how you felt. You kind of mentioned it and it kind of moved on.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I was gonna say, to me, that's a sign of like stronger.
Oh yeah, these people are clearly like making sure they understand the board state.
Yeah. I was just curious how you interpret it, because I think you could interpret it also as like, I got a bunch of readers over here, like what people would say at the LGS.
Okay,
like,
sure. No, I
was curious where your head was on.
No, actually, let's just talk about that for just a second. Like, noticing that at the end of Diamond, at the beginning of Mythic, was really interesting. Like, I do it a lot on Arena to like double check my work, and seeing that other people are doing it was like, oh, okay, this never happens in events. Like, straight up, when it was happening, it was like, oh man, they're reading my cards. That's cool. I'm glad this is happening. And I'm going to be honest, like, I'm a big event believer. That does not happen in events. Like, that's just not a thing. Abe, what about you?
Yeah, my always improvement this week came from actually just playing some competitive Magic that was not tied to any of my, like, any upcoming events or otherwise. I wound up deciding that it's been a while since I've really dug into a limited format, and so I played the Sunday Sealed Challenge on Magic Online because I just wanted to play some Sealed, and I had been enjoying AETHERDRIFT Limited, I think, because of kind of the pacing of it. It's a lot less snowbally, I think, than some other formats that I've played in recent years. And so yeah, so I just set out the time. I like looked at the moto schedule, saw when it was, and I just played it. It felt really refreshing to just play an event where the prizes were, what the prizes were. I was just playing really to enjoy competitive Magic rather than necessarily being like, oh, I could have spent this time playing more modern, or playing some standard to prepare for this episode, and like playing with kind of those goals aside and just for what I enjoy. And it was really fun. I think that it's something that I, especially in alignment with my goals for myself for this year, of just playing more challenges, playing more events that like I want to play, and being in the streets more, and being more of an all like well-rounded grinder, like I felt like I was in some of my strongest years. Like doing that again felt really good, and I think it was also fun to just and I learned a lot from getting to engage the limited players in my community, talking about the build of like my sealed pool, and what they thought they would have done, and just really digging in and doing it. And so that was my improvement for the week.
I love that. And also I love what you said about like your goal of like being in the streets. That's my goal this year, and like I've unfortunately been sick the last month, but I'm gonna join you on that. We should like get a challenge together where we like see who's in the streets more or something. But that's gonna do it.
I'm gonna say I got 2 challenges on the board. I'm pacing one a month.
Okay. I'll talk to you about that offline because I'm about to one up you. If you want to join the conversation, Patreon Discord is the best place to do it. The best place. We talk about all the things. We have a daily discussion every day. We have some questions from patrons. We have Serious Gamer. There's format discussions. Right now it's mostly standard and modern, as would be expected. But yeah, heading over there. Patrons of $5 or more get access to that. The public Discord for all of He's the Game Media is also available. But I want to give a shout out to the YouTube comments. We got comments on everything the last 2 weeks, which really does help the show. Like if you have just a second to like leave a comment on whatever you're watching, whether it's a short on YouTube, a TikTok, or this video, it does help the show more than anything else. Every time Abe, you actually challenged the listeners, I think, was it 2 or 3 weeks ago? I
don't know. Someone in the comments tell me, was it 2 or 3 weeks ago? And also, if you don't know why we're pushing it in the comments, ask that question in the comments and we'll answer you.
What's so funny is Abe did that, and it was like our most listened to episode. I promise, if you don't, you could just type gibberish. Like, it doesn't matter. It really does help the show, and we really appreciate it. You can find the show on Blue Sky at CCMTG Pod, at CCMTG on Twitter, and at CCMTG Pod on Instagram and TikTok. You can also check out Drafting Archetypes. I love it. It was so funny. Somebody asked in our Discord, like, what's the best limited content? I'm trying to get into limited. And I was like, I'm so bad. Like, am I allowed to answer this question? But I honestly think that, like, Abe and I listen almost every week. It is such a good podcast. It's so fun to listen to. And I have conversations with Sam coming up that I hope will help us move forward. So, also, shout out to Sam. He just conceded in the finals to Mark of the PTQ in Chicago. And Mark was who I beat in round 1 of the RCQ that I qualified for the Pro Tour with. And Mark was like sitting there telling me how he flew to Utah for the easiest RCQ. And I was like, that's great. I'm from Utah. Let's go. But then he beat me in the Pro Tour that I qualified for. So, he probably got a better end. Like, comment, subscribe, review. And where can people find you, Mason?
You can find me on Twitter at Mason E. Clark. You can find me at twitch.tv/the Mason Clark. And you can reach out to me for coaching via any of those social media things that I just talked about, or my email, masoneclark@gmail.com. And you can see me at SCGCon Charlotte. I'll be there Friday, Saturday, and Sunday doing commentary. And I'll be walking around, so feel free to come up and say hi. Abe, if someone wants to find you, where can they go?
You can find me over at Blue Sky, username More Nothings. You can also find me on Twitter at More Nothings. If you're looking for coaching, I probably have a one spot available between now and the RC. So if you want to be the lucky winner, you can either DM me on one of those platforms or send me an email at morenothings@gmail.com, and just put coaching in the description. Spencer, how about you?
Yeah, so Blue Sky at Spencer13H. I cannot take coaching right now. I have a couple of job interviews coming up that product job interviews are kind of weird. Like you have to like prep for them and like make stuff. So I can't take coaching right now. But if you're looking for coaching in the future, probably after Charlotte, just reach out at spencerhalland@gmail.com. It's super easy. I know you can find me every week, starting again this week on Constructed Clash here on the YouTube channel, and every week on the Neat to Nerd podcast. We had a weird thing, so like this podcast will somehow come out before Intro this week, but we're like just talking about things that we were excited about in Nerddom this week. I want to give a huge shout out really quick to a couple of people before we go, though. Just everybody stayed within Portland. I didn't get the chance to talk about it, but like Fire Shoes, podcast listener and patron Josh Collar, Dilly, David. It was really fun to be in Portland with you guys, and I had a ton of fun. I know that I was sick that last day and I didn't get to participate with you guys, but it was a good time, and I just wanted to shout them out. So thank you everybody for listening, and we'll see you all next week with a brand new episode of Constructed Criticism.
Magic, magic, magic.